All right. Hello, folks. Welcome to Memorial Day edition of our stream. Hope everybody's doing well.
Yeah, happy holiday, Ted.
Yes, to you too.
So I've got something interesting going on, Ted.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. So I think most of our viewers probably don't know that my real work, when I'm not, being star of stage and screen here on the live stream, my real work is as a consultant, working with senior leaders and organizations about how they can scale their teams, typically in startups. And I was talking to a company recently that had just recently lost their VP of engineering. Mm-hmm. So normally I'm working alongside the CTO, VP of engineering, chief product officer. And they said, well, can you come work for us as an interim VP of engineering, which isn't that much different than the kind of work I normally do. And I said, well, yeah, I could do that. And we're working through all the details right now, and it's likely to start soon, hopefully, fingers crossed. Nothing's certain until it's done.
Yeah.
But that does make me wonder, like, when you think about the sort of senior leaders you've worked with, mm-hmm. I know you've worked in some big companies like Apple and so forth. But when you think about kind of the managers of managers and the managers of managers and managers, what is it that you wish they would do differently, or what do they do well, or what do you wish they knew? I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
So it depends on the company size, but in the companies where there is a VP of engineering who is usually the manager of the frontline managers, if not more distant than that, but assuming sort of at that level.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at.
To me, it's, at least in the companies I worked with, it's really about coordination. Like there's a bunch of different teams, presumably ultimately it's all under this, they're all working on something related, although not necessarily. So it's coordination and allocation of resources, I guess. When I've had relationships, because I was a dev manager, so I basically reported to the VP of engineering. Then it was much more about coordination and sort of settling battles, because there was like, we needed this from this team and they were not giving it to us because they felt something else was more important. And so sort of resolving those conflicts of, I guess ultimately it still comes down to sort of resources and sort of direction, and really pushing the strategy of what are we trying to do? What is our strategy? And I think I have not observed anyone do that really well.
That's sort of a telling statement right there, isn't it?
It's like, what is our strategy? And it's this vague stuff. It's like, that's not a strategy. And like, I got so like bent out of shape because I'm like, do I even know what a strategy? And I started looking around and reading a book, and it's like, I found a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. It's like, now they've defined it. And that's not at all what was going on. And so it was no wonder that there wasn't quite alignment, which is what you really want.
This company, I think one of the reasons, the reason we were talking originally was because they are a startup. A lot of the startups I work with it sort of stretches the definition of the word startup because they're far enough along that they've had some success.
Right.
So you think of a startup, you think of a scrappy company that's, been around for a year or two, right? But actually a lot of these startups are 10 years old at this point.
Right. Yeah. I don't consider it a startup if it's 10 years old. If they've found product market fit, like they're now generating revenue and so on, I don't consider them a startup anymore.
But the companies often think of themselves still as startups.
Yeah.
And there is a real qualitative difference between a company that is a mature startup, whatever you want to call that, and a company that is not.
Right.
And maybe you call that a small to medium enterprise, SME, but maybe not, because these
maybe nobody likes the word enterprise because they feel that means bureaucratic.
Yeah, so, well, it does.
And
I also work for big companies, although I definitely prefer the startup-y type companies. Yeah. And there is a major difference between what you see in those sorts of organizations and what you see in these startups. But a lot of the startups that contact me are contacting me because they're growing, and they've had a lot of success, and they need to grow, and they're actually running into problems with that growth. And it comes back to the kinds of stuff you're talking about, which is coordination. It's really easy to coordinate when you're that really scrappy startup and you've got 10 people in the office.
Right.
You just get together and talk. Maybe it's harder now with remote, but and actually I've heard of organizations having trouble with coordination at even at very small sizes because they're remote. Things are so much easier when you can just be face to face. But once you get up to the point where you're 100 people in the office or in the company,
right,
coordination becomes a real problem.
Yeah.
Maybe this is naive of me, because I've got sort of an outsider looking in, and I'm looking forward to this opportunity to be an insider looking out. But in my mind, the role of the VP of engineering, as opposed to the CTO, the role of the VP of engineering is to create operational excellence.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they should be resolving these conflicts. I think they should be creating the situation where the conflicts are resolved. And again, maybe that's naive of me, but in an agile environment, and I know the word agile is so terrible these days, and it means to a lot of people it means
micromanagement.
Yeah. And I'm so sorry that's true, because that's not where it came from.
No, it hurts so much that's what it's become, and I'm like,
I've found myself saying extreme programming rather than agile these days, because at least that, even though it sort of fell off the hype train, that's kind of a good thing, because the people on the hype train are not very nice people. They're in it to make money as quick as possible. At least the ones driving the hype trains. Anyway, I think I derailed myself. Speaking of trains, what were we talking about?
We're talking about that what the VP of engineering should do, and if it's in an agile environment or an XP environment.
Right. What we want to do is we want to push the decisions down. And a lot of these bureaucratic organizations, they accrete power and responsibility towards the top. And so the big decisions get pushed up, and a lot of the bureaucratic delays come from decisions having to wend their way up to somebody who frankly does not have the context to make those decisions well.
I was going to say it pushes it up to where they have less knowledge, and it's so backwards. It's like, no, you want to push the decisions to where the greatest amount of that knowledge is, and not the least of it.
Yeah. So a really core cutting edge work process design idea, which I won't call agile, is that we push the decisions to the people who have the knowledge and context to make those decisions well. And we push the authority to those people as well.
Right.
So if you've got an environment where the VP of engineering or the senior leaders are constantly responding to conflicts, what you have is a process design problem. You have an organizational design problem, because you should have it set up so that the right people can autonomously get together and create and hash out the answers themselves. Now, like I said, maybe that's naive, because I do know that a big part of the role of managers and senior managers is to work through people's personal baggage, and that there's a lot of that, and that never goes away, because there's always interpersonal conflicts. But I would like to say that if those decisions are always coming up to the VP or CTO or something like that, then really what you have is a process design problem.
Yeah, and they should be looking at that as not their job to resolve, but that meta of stop having it happen.
Right.
Like if I'm constantly saying, why, I have to intervene again or bring people together, there's a problem with the design of the organization, of how things are split. And I know in my case at Guidewire, where there was a platform team and the 3 products depended on it, clearly the way it was designed, and this affected the architecture of the system, right? Conway's Law, right? And it meant that things were hard for my team to do autonomously. We had a dependency, and that dependency was not necessarily friendly to us, or changes just took a long time because of the architecture.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about this in one of our previous episodes, and it's such a good case study because it's so common. Like this, what you're describing is part of what I call the default process.
Yeah.
I'm going to write an article on this at some point, but if you find people who don't study process design and they don't study work systems, there's sort of a default that they fall into, and it involves pull requests and it involves a platform team and all these other things. And it's sort of what everybody thinks of as, well, yeah, this is just how you do this. And it has various flaws that are non-obvious. And one of the things with a platform team is that the platform team becomes a bottleneck. It becomes a locus of conflict around priorities.
Yep.
I think the platform team, feature team, or customer-facing team split is so common and so fundamentally flawed because I've seen it fail over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Suiji says in the chat, we were talking about pushing decisions to the people who have the ability, the context and knowledge to make them. Suiji says what should be flowing from the top down is context, vision, and general direction. I would say yes, except I probably wouldn't say general direction. I would probably say strategy.
I was gonna say exactly that. It's like, that sounds like strategy, not being
But there is one more piece, and again, maybe this is me being naive. Again, I'm looking forward to being on the inside, looking out and learning how all my theory, falls against the rocks of practical reality. But I think the other thing is that a manager, in this regard, this is true for any manager, a manager of managers or a manager of team members, team contributors. Notice I don't say individual contributor. A manager of managers of managers. I think part of what that manager is doing is either coaching or making sure coaching is available. Teach so that, and this is where I break from sort of the modern business school line of thought, which says that a manager can manage anything. I like managers who have some real expertise, who are actually, the senior folks who have been around the block and can provide actual coaching to the people because they're experts in some way. They are no longer doing the work directly, but they are intimately familiar with how the work is done and how the work should be done.
That and this idea of somehow that managers are going to figure stuff out, because if they are those experts, right, those people who were the people doing the work, and then they've been promoted. Although I don't even look at it as promoted, it's a job change. They've changed jobs to be manager. Do they get coaching and training on how to be a manager? And I have personally never experienced a company doing this well. I know when I became a manager and I was like, what the heck do I do? Because I didn't really have any good examples in my career of what I thought a good manager was. And I had to actively go out and look for coaching and training and so on to try and figure it out, with really no support from my management, because they weren't very good at it either.
And that is another thing that I see so commonly. A lot of first level managers get thrown into the role in an environment that provides no support whatsoever. And the skills needed to be a successful manager are so different than the skills needed to be a successful team contributor.
Right. That's why I stopped myself and said, it's not a promotion. It's not like you are now a super senior extra special developer. You are something very different. You have a very different job.
I worked with somebody once who told me that he was a manager because that was the key to promotions, and that actually he'd rather just be a contributor, and honestly, an individual contributor, thinking of this guy. And so on his team, what he would do is he would give people assignments, and he'd wait a couple of weeks, and he'd get upset that they weren't doing the assignments. Then he'd swoop in and he'd do it themselves in half a day. constantly cutting the legs out from under them.
Ouch.
Yeah. One of the worst managers I've ever seen, and completely unaware of it, but a really, really good programmer, but an individual contributor, not somebody who. Right. So I firmly believe that a senior developer raises the level of the people around them. Now, there's been a lot of title inflation, so maybe now we're talking about a principal engineer rather than a senior engineer.
Yeah, I think staff is more like what I used to think of like of a senior these days.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure what the difference between staff and principal and which one comes first. But yeah, I think a senior engineer, somebody who's truly senior, if they don't get to be senior or staff or whatever if they only work on their own. Right. They need to be raising the level of the people around them. And the way you do that is by coaching and by teaching the people around you how to do their work without you doing it for them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that coaching aspect is important. And I think it's particularly important for people at that VP or director level, depending on the size of your organization, because those skills of doing management well, unless you're in a really big organization, and even in the really big organizations, I don't see this, there's probably no training for it.
There's no training.
Yeah.
Even at Apple, which is famous for lots of things, including sort of certain kinds of training, their internal training was honestly embarrassing. I was sort of not half in that team, but like very much involved, because as a solution architect when I joined, part of my job was to do training and train people on an internal system. And I had heard such great things about Apple University and so on, and it was kind of crap. It was really disappointing, because it's not about like it's not like they don't have the money and resources. It didn't seem important.
Well, I think, so you've got this constant thing that happens in organizations. First, you've got cost center versus, I forget what the other term is.
Profit center.
Profit center. I was going to say value center, but that wasn't right. Yeah. So of course, the companies where you can directly tie their activities to revenue tend to get all the rewards, and the company and the parts of the company that you can't are called cost centers. Yep. That doesn't mean they're not valuable. It doesn't mean they're not important, but you just can't directly connect the revenue of the organization to that activity. And they always get short shrift. Yep. And the best folks know that they get short shrift and they don't go there. Yep. Maybe, again, thinking about what does a good VP of engineering do, maybe this is because my background and my work is all about teaching people how to be better. Yep. It's about coaching and immersion and showing rather than telling, is in a lot of cases, right, as evidenced by this series right here. Right. And so I think that I have this bias towards coaching and teaching as being a really important part of what I do. And so maybe that's why I think it's a really important part of what a VP of engineering should do. Yeah. But it's, if I'm in a large enough organization, I'm not going to be directly teaching people how to do test-driven development, right, for example. But I'm going to be damn sure that if test-driven development is important to us, that there is a culture of test-driven development in the organization. Everybody knows how to do it well. And part of that is through mentoring by the senior developers and through training for the new hires. Yep.
Yeah, I actually pushed for the creation of a little committee for learning and training inside of Guidewire, because there was like no recognition, and they'd been around for a while, and so they were sort of transitioning, I think, from sort of scrappy to sort of really, but it was already a couple hundred people by the time I joined, but really they had nothing in place for any kind of learning, any kind of budget for learning, let alone actual training. And as I said, I'm sort of amazed and saddened when I joined Apple. The onboarding training was half a day. Wow. Half a day. And, given sort of what it seems like from the outside, that's astonishing to me. Because when I joined Google, it was a week-long thing, and I know Facebook has their 6-week-long kind of thing, and it's like that's so important because, like you said, some of the stuff has to be cultural, and that's how you imbue the cultures. One way is you get the new people and you imbue them with the culture and say, this is, we're spending time on this because we feel it's important, and therefore this is what you're going to do. Now, of course, that can be sidetracked. It's like, oh, well, now you're in the real team and now it's different. But at least the idea is to do that.
And also the new folks, they're a source of excitement and enthusiasm.
Exactly.
So you can actually sort of bring that in from those training. Like if you can say, this is the way we do it, and don't let people tell you otherwise. If you're hearing otherwise,
right? Let me know.
Here's your mentor. Right. Talk to them.
Yeah.
There's also this thing of creating mentors, where when somebody new comes on, there's an established person that they work with, and teaching those mentors how to be good mentors.
Right. And the onboarding also is in that case is like, it's not just here's 1 week or 2 weeks and then boom, you're off. It's this continual, and this so. In chat is this management the coach. Like, yes, management has to coach you and give you feedback and put you in touch with the right person. That might not be for technical stuff. It might not be the manager who's coaching, but setting up the senior people, and they might be the ones doing the presentations and the training for the onboarding. And I helped start that up and participated in our intern training. So our intern training program I thought was great. And the reason why it was great is because we really set up solid projects, but we had training. Like the interns weren't just thrown into the mix. We actually, and I led a lot of that training. It's like, okay, here's what we do. Here's what we feel is important. And then mentored them closely. Not just, let them, like, when I was at Apple, it's like an intern came in and was sort of off on their own and sort of asked questions when they needed it. It's like, to me, that's such a waste, because how do you know what you're getting out of them and what are they learning? And you don't really get a sense of, to me, the intern, and we turned around, we hired so many people from our intern program.
Well, exactly.
And they were so awesome because they had that excitement that you want.
Yeah, interns are not a source of free labor.
No.
They're an investment.
Exactly.
And what that investment is in the next generation of your company's success.
Yeah.
And so if you're having interns come in and they're not creating success and they're not accepting a position at your company when they're done, that investment has been wasted.
Yeah. And if you can't really evaluate them, or you can only evaluate them based on some end product, it's like, no, that's not the purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we did, that some of that training actually turned into new developer onboarding training. And we spent, and as a trainer, like, this is something I was keep coming back to in my career. No matter what I was doing, I was always teaching. That was something that was really bottom up and not sort of top down.
Yeah. Well, speaking of leading by example, teaching by doing, should we work on our AI Chronicles project?
Yes, let's do that.
All right. So when we left off, we had finished our front end placeholder UI, and we finished our back end communication with OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I tell our build to bundle things up, and then I serve the front end, we should see on localhost 5010 our beautiful, beautiful game. This is glorious. I don't understand why nobody's throwing money at us. We'll start a Kickstarter. We'll reach 500 mil in no time.
Oh, yeah.
I've told you what the largest crowdfunding project of all time is, right?
Isn't it Sanderson's book series?
Oh, you know what? It might be now.
Yeah, because that one like creams by 10x anything else that I've seen.
Did they make?
I think 40 to 50 million. It was
Okay,
insane.
I can do better than that. Star Citizen
Oh,
is
okay.
approaching 600 million.
Yeah. Okay. That's definitely.
Uh,
But that's not a short amount of time.
no, it's been 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think they're sort of different. Yeah.
Where are they at right now? Over half a billion.
And that's almost a year ago.
$584 million. Yeah, so we're doing a game. I don't understand why we don't have 1% of that.
Because it doesn't have that glowing neon look yet, which I'm working on.
It doesn't. But I noticed that in
I wonder, did it start out
setup? You got glowing neon. So.
Yes, right. I wonder though, did it start out looking like that? Like it's always interesting, like and of course we're on a tangent again.
But of course,
it's always interesting how, and I know I do this, of comparing something you're starting out with somebody else's middle or end product. Yeah. And it's so unfair to oneself to do that. But a lot of times you don't see what was the first prototype looking like. And that's one of the things that I like about building stuff in public is like, look, this is the ugly, not finished, rough edges kind of thing, but at least it provides some value. And you may see now the finished shiny product, but here's how you can see what does that look like earlier on in the process.
That reminds me of what Ira Glass said about taste, which is such a great quote. So if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to read it out to you now, but if you're watching this and you haven't seen it, do a web search for Ira Glass taste quote. He's got this amazing quote, which is basically about your work is going to suck when you start out, and don't give up because you've got taste, but you don't have the ability yet.
Right.
And that's a really hard place to be. So anyway, so I think since I have no taste, I'm going to say that this is actually superb, and it's basically good to go, except that our front end does not actually talk to the back end.
Right.
We've got a back end that can talk to OpenAI, and we have a front end that can do front end stuff, but the two are just sort of off in their own worlds, sort of like a classic standard process.
Yes.
Front end team and
back end team. All right, now we got to have your talk. No, that's not what it was supposed to say, but
yeah. And honestly, the front end team finished their work and the back end team finished their work. So why isn't it working? Yeah. Why isn't it done? So I think what we're going to do today is we're going to try to hook these things up, right? Let's take a look at our plan. Where are we at here? So we finished the placeholder web page, I believe. And next, what we need to do is have a single back and forth, single request response with OpenAI. Last time there was a little bit of confusion about, well, do we mean like a full conversation or is it just back and forth? But I think at this point we're just looking for the back and forth.
One round trip, yeah.
One round trip, yeah.
So sweet, yes, isn't that what integrate us say? No, it doesn't magically do anything.
And so in terms of user stories, at some point we're going to want to remove that hello component once we get things testing. Or not user stories, in terms of tasks. And we also talked about changing the HTTP test to test against the JSON rather than the ETO. So we should probably take a moment to look at what you did there, because I know you did that. And we also talked about moving the manual backend test into another location. Did you have a chance to work on that at all?
Yes. So that's done. The first one isn't quite done. I did a test just on the JSON serialization, and we can discuss whether that's enough or not.
Yeah. So let's set those aside for a moment. Just talk about what do we need to do to get the round trip. What engineering tasks do we have to finish connecting the front end to the back end?
Well, we need a backend endpoint to respond to a front end post. Do we have that endpoint yet? I don't remember.
No,
but
we don't.
we need that endpoint. So we need a post endpoint for the submission.
Yeah, post endpoint for submission for front end views. Front end needs a fetch wrapper. The front end needs to use the fetch wrapper inside. Actually, no. I think that in addition to the fetch wrapper, we also need a OpenAI, a backend. Whatever that endpoint is on the backend, we need a wrapper for that,
Right.
and that's going to need the fetch wrapper.
Right.
And then we need the application class, React application class needs to use the front end wrapper.
Right.
I think this story is too big, Ted. I think we should split it.
Okay.
I mean, maybe not, it wouldn't be too big if we were working full time as part of a real team. But given that we have nominally 3 hours of work to do every week, and we spend at least half of that sidetracking, I think we need this to be smaller. I suggest we split this into send from the back end to the front end, or from the front end to the back end, and receive from the back end back to the front end.
Okay. Yeah, because it's one request response. So I'm not sure how we want to split that up.
Well, the reason I'm splitting it up is because as I'm just thinking through this, so the application code on the front end, and for those of you watching, just to provide some context here, when I say application, I mean literally the application React component, which is what provides our placeholder right now. And there's no logic in here whatsoever. It's just HTML.
Right.
That needs to talk to the wrapper for the backend service. That needs to talk to the fetch for the backend to talk to the backend service.
Right.
The backend service needs to have the endpoint, which responds to that post.
Right.
And then the backend, that endpoint needs to talk to OpenAI. So all of that's like a whole series of work.
Okay.
We get half of a walking skeleton.
Yeah, I see that.
And then it's going to return. So we have to come back to the service, which now has to render something back to the client, which now needs to take that and put it on the page.
Right.
And so I think sending it through is going to build a lot of our scaffolding, and then bringing it back is going to sort of flesh it out.
Right.
What I'm thinking is story one is send prompt to OpenAI from front end, and then display OpenAI response in front end. That's how I'm thinking about it.
Yep.
You buy that?
Yep, I buy that.
Okay. So in that case, if we go sort of outside in, we've got the application class using the front end wrapper. Front end wrapper for the back end service, which is going to call a fetch wrapper, which is going to talk to the back end post endpoint, and then the back end endpoint talks to OpenAI.
Right.
I think that's everything to get this story done.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Before we start on that, do you want to look at this, or should we keep our momentum going and just start on this stuff?
Let's start on this stuff. We can look at that later if we have time.
Okay. And if we don't, it's all in the repo, which is online. You can find the links at jamesshore.com/s/AI-chronicles, which I think is
Right there.
Project, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, and there's the GitHub as well. Yep. Perfect. Okay, so this comes back to outside in or inside out.
It does, doesn't it?
It does.
So for a single page application, I haven't done enough that I would know where to start.
Part of the reason we talked about last time, when I think it was our very first episode where we talked of the AI Chronicles, where we talked about outside in versus
Right.
bottom up, and I said, well, I always think sort of outside in, but I don't always implement it outside in. And I think we're seeing that here. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it here. If we were to really do outside in, we'd build that application class to use the front end wrapper.
Right.
But almost instantly, what we're going to turn around and do is say, well, let's build our front end wrapper.
Right.
And then almost instantly, we're going to turn around and say, let's build our fetch wrapper.
Right.
So I would tend to write the fetch wrapper and then the front end wrapper that uses it, and then the application class to use that.
Yeah. And I think it's probably similar for what I tend to do without a single page application is I might sketch sort of the HTML, but pretty quickly it's going to be like, what's the endpoint I'm going to talk to? How am I going to talk to it? And not going to do anything more with the HTML, not even going to write any, HTML tests, just basically do that what's sometimes called subcutaneous right below it. To basically now, okay, what does the endpoint need to do? And then pretty quickly, I'm just talking to a method and what does it do?
Yeah.
So outside in doesn't always mean you are writing everything at each point. You're not completely fleshing it out. I mean, some people, I guess, do that. But it's one of those, I don't think you have to do all of that. I think it's how much do you know enough about to move to the next layer is really, I think, what it's about.
Well, I think we do know enough to build the fetch wrapper.
Yeah.
Because that's pretty straightforward. What we need, I think we've already decided we wanted a post endpoint. And so what we need is a wrapper that can send a post to the server. So should we start here and start working on that?
Yes, and I have one question, and it's more just a what if. What if, how and maybe I'll ask it again later, but one of the things that I think about is like, what if we wanted this to be a WebSocket versus sort of request response? How much would that change, basically this wrapper?
This wrapper, so the way I'm imagining it, as you know, in the sort of A-frame architecture approach I use, there is there's the application layer, and then there's the infrastructure layer. And in the infrastructure layer, I tend to divide it into application level infrastructure or high level infrastructure, and then low level infrastructure. High level infrastructure is the abstraction over the thing that we're using. So in this case, the backend service wrapper, which we might call perhaps backend client. And then there's the low-level wrapper, which is the wrapper over the protocol, which in this case would be the HTTP client.
Right.
Just like we have a JSON HTTP client on the backend and a OpenAI client. JSON HTTP client on the backend is the low-level wrapper, and the OpenAI client is the high-level wrapper.
Right.
So I think that the backend client won't change if we use Socket.io. I mean, obviously the implementation will change, but the application won't even notice, except that whatever changes we want to do to take advantage of the fact that it now can push us events.
Right.
But I think the HTTP client would go away entirely.
Right.
Or would get retired and replaced by a Socket.io client.
Right. Yeah, I was just sort of interested in sort of just thinking about that a little bit, because that's something that can sometimes change this high level wrapper. Because if it's a completely different kind of communication mechanism, sometimes that'll be okay. It's like, I don't care if, I'm sending events out or this way, or sending it around through Kafka or WebSocket. Like it's still this events, but now it's like, it's no longer request response. It's now pub sub. And so that's a bit different. So
yeah, I think that'd be interesting to do that. I don't know if we'll ever get to that in the show, but HTTP client is basically a throwaway and rewrite. Just change it to socket.io client. Like there's nothing that you get to keep from one to the other.
Right.
Backend client, I bet you we could incrementally refactor from using HTTP client to using socket.io client.
Yep.
And the reason for that is you can treat socket.io as a request response.
Yes.
And then we'd modify it to support, sending events, to having the observer pattern of basically pub sub. And and then of course that would necessitate some changes in the application layer as well to support that. But I think the amount of changes would get less and less the higher up the call chain you get.
Yeah. And as Suiji points out in chat, it's like this front end wrapper for backend service and the front end wrapper for the concrete IO is very similar to how I divide my adapters, almost exactly. So,
yeah. So Dodo, the disadvantage of HTTP, unless you're playing some tricks, is that it's fire and forget. You send a request, you get a response, the connection closes, and the next one you do is a brand new request. So if the server does something that they want to notify us about, we won't hear about it until we ask them again. And there's various tricks you can pull with HTTP to hear about that. One is polling. The other is called long polling, but they're kind of hacks. So the benefit of socket.io over HTTP is that it allows the server to say, hey, here's something you ought to know. Which for our current story, we don't need.
Yeah. And it's also very much related to blocking and non-blocking.
Right.
Like typically your requests, you're not going to have a lot of outbound requests and sit there and wait for them. You don't want to serialize them, because if you basically say, hey, this happens, and then let me know when something changes, that is a very different way of thinking about it. And again, usually it's the server needs to push something onto the client, onto the UI to say, hey, something has been updated, separate from having been triggered by a request.
So I think one of the core things that you have to think about when you're doing evolutionary design. So of course, in extreme programming, which is what we're using here, you're trying to build as little as possible to solve just the problem you have in front of you right now.
Yes.
And build it in such a way that it can go in any direction inexpensively.
Yep.
I think part of the thought process of that is not, don't think about the future.
Right.
It's not, I'm just going to build the easiest thing. I'm going to build something simple that can expand in every direction. And I think a key part of that decision-making process is a phrase I use constantly, which is, when, not if, I change this design decision, how hard have I made my life? How hard will this be? So I think it's a good question. If we choose to build the HTTP client, and then we end up turning to socket.io instead, have we just wasted a whole bunch of work to build this HTTP client? And my answer to that, I think, is no, because typically sites that use socket.io also use HTTP. They use HTTP for the things that are call and response, and they use socket.io for the things that are push.
Right.
So if we imagine our front end, which, let me pull up our beautiful front end here. Right now, if I say hello and press here, really the way we're imagining this is we need to see that response back, right? And we can do that asynchronously with the browser. We can allow other stuff to happen while we're waiting for that response back. But that call and response is sort of a core feature of the experience.
Right.
Now, we might also have something up in the corner like the current temperature, which as the temperature changes in the server simulation, it pushes that to us with socket.io. That we don't want to do an HTTP request for. So I think we're likely to have both HTTP for the things that make sense for that we're waiting for a response, and socket.io for things that are more, we're getting pushed to us. It might be more elegant to combine them under a single protocol, but at this point, I think If it is, we haven't wasted that much work. Building the HTTP client is not going to be that hard. And it is simpler than building a Socket.io client.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is you may just not know. And you may be able to do a little bit of exploration, but there's also like, how much time do you want to spend figuring out that future? And
even if you guess wrong, the number of times where you haven't built something and you didn't end up needing it will cost less than the few times where you did build something you didn't that wrong and you had to throw it away and build it over.
Yeah.
Like when I see people not using evolutionary design, which is almost everybody, they are massively overbuilding.
Yes.
Massively overbuilding and wasting a huge amount of time, and then wasting even more time when they're having to rip out the stuff that was wrong.
Yeah.
It is so difficult to change code that has its tendrils all throughout your system. That's the wrong design for your system.
And even if it's well designed, over engineering, it's still work to maintain. It's basically like, I'm gonna go run a race, but I'm gonna, instead of being nice and trim, I'm gonna put 10 pounds in a backpack. I don't need that 10 pounds. It's literally dead weight, but I have to carry it around, and I have to it's going to slow me down. And everything I do, I have to consider its design and its code, even though I still don't use it. And so it's just this sink, this sinkhole of work. And then if you're lucky, it was actually useful. But in my experience, it's so often that it's like, oh, it actually needs to be this other thing. So you end up throwing it away anyway. So you've nicely maintained it. Even if you really did a good job, you've nicely maintained this thing that you basically have to completely unearth and throw away and do something else.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's sort of a really common failure in people's thinking here, especially on the parts of engineers. They see something that went wrong and they want to prevent that from happening again. So they design all this stuff that will prevent things from going wrong. But actually, making mistakes and correcting those mistakes is not necessarily more wasteful than carrying that weight with you everywhere you go.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's painful to build something that was wrong and then have to throw it away, or to build something that wasn't enough and realize that actually the correct solution is a completely different approach, and so we have to throw away the simple solution, build something more complicated. You notice that throwaway, and you don't realize that if we had started with a more complicated thing, which we probably would have gotten wrong anyway, because we don't know exactly.
We don't have enough.
We don't know exactly what our needs are. And then we carry that for a couple of years until we get to the point where we actually need it. We have spent more effort on that than throwing away the thing that was simple and building something that was complicated.
And sometimes that temporary thing is often lasts longer than you think it will. Yeah. Like, okay, this isn't going to be good enough for the full thing, but it turns out actually it's fine. And then because other things, so it's not only that you will know more later, your priorities will be different later.
Yes.
And that thing that you built out and spent so much time and effort on, it turned out to be very unimportant compared to this other thing that you discovered recently that you now have to do.
That is such a common experience for me, where, I've gotten pretty good after 23 years of doing this, coming up on 24 since I started using extreme programming. Actually, I think it's really close to 24 years. I've gotten pretty good about the agony and saying, no, I'm just going to do the simple thing. And the number of times but I'm still thinking, oh, but I'm going to need this thing.
Right.
And the number of times that has been completely wrong is mind blowing.
Yep.
Like, I have so often found that the simple thing just lasts and lasts and lasts and lasts. And the complicated thing was never needed.
Yeah.
It's really gratifying actually to see that, because you spend so much less time over engineering.
Exactly.
And all the stuff that you thought was under engineering is actually just
the right amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is those simple things, they do evolve. They do get better. I hate to bring up this bit of branding again, but when I built the little test framework, so I started out and my automated build was using a tool called Jake, because why would I build my own build tool? Like everybody's built a
That's
build tool, I'll
crazy.
use one. Well, it turned out that Jake got worse and worse over time, and the alternatives got more and more complicated. I'm sure everybody's familiar with how terrible the front end ecosystem is when it comes to build tools. And the so I switched to my own thing, and I just wrote this really simple, let's map strings to functions, which is like literally a couple of lines of code in JavaScript.
Yeah.
Well, over time, I added to that. And that simple solution, which I thought, well, that's just clearly not enough.
Right.
It got more sophisticated. I added dependency analysis. I added my own testing framework.
Mm-hmm.
But each one of these things was really small change. And that really simple solution got better and better. And because I was refactoring as I went, it didn't get worse in terms of its design. It got better in terms of its design.
Yeah, there's a book, I think it's by David Brin, called The Practice Effect. And it's this world where the more something is used, the better it becomes at that thing. And I always think about that because it's exactly what you're describing. It's like you build something that does just enough, and then you use it, and then you find the little pieces, and that's where the evolutionary, it's not big bang changes. It evolves to get better and better fit for use, right? Because that's what evolution is all about. It's fit for use. It's not better in some abstract way. It's a better fit for the environment it's in.
Yeah.
And I think people haven't experienced that, so it's really hard for them to believe that that's possible.
But it's so true. I mean, I think the typical lived experience for a lot of people is that the older the code base, the more painful it is to work in.
Yeah.
But if you do evolutionary design properly, the experience is exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
The code that I use for my website, I started it in 2012. It's now 2023. I'm still running the same code base.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually started out being for a completely different website. It was for my Let's Code JavaScript stream. And then it got so good that I was like, well, I'm going to use it for my main website. And every day it's better. Like it's actually faster running tests, even though there's orders of magnitude more tests. An order of magnitude more tests than there was in the beginning. The tests are actually faster and more effective and more reliable now than they were then.
Yep.
The release used to take 90 seconds. Now it takes 60 seconds. Like it just keeps getting better, and it's such a pleasure to work with.
Yeah.
So let's finish up our plan, and then I think we've nattered away our first third of our show. So we're going to work on the front end fetch wrapper. Is that what we agreed on?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what we're going to do when we come back, folks, from our break. We will get started programming on that.
All right. See you in a few. All right. We're back.
All right. Special all rants all the time episode of the AI Chronicles. I was editing together last week's video, and I realized we had very few sidetracks in the last week.
Yeah.
Like we were really just focused on getting the code done. Yeah. So
we're making up for that.
We're back to form in this episode. But yeah, let's do some actual coding. This front end fetch wrapper, I think. Should I get us kicked off on that?
Yeah, let's get us started here.
So I think I've got a lot more familiarity with Node.js than you do.
Way more.
How would you like to approach this in terms of navigating and driving?
That's a good question.
I've built some variation of HTTP clients so many times that I could just sort of go through it in my sleep, but I don't know that that's the best way to approach it here.
I mean, we could sort of go through it, and since I am a novice, I will be asking interesting questions and probably get to the point where can also write some tests, or you write the tests and maybe I can implement it. I'm not quite sure.
Okay. So it sounds like what you're thinking is I'll get things started and you'll ask questions as we go and sort of slow me down.
Yes.
And you can actually sort of be a viewer stand-in as well and make sure that everybody's clear on what's happening. And then at some point, we'll switch back to more of a standard navigator driver.
Sort of once we get bootstrapped to that point, yeah.
As an aside, I'm not suggesting we do this now. One of the most effective ways, so driving and pairing, of course, I guess we're going to sidetrack already, but pairing, of course, is best done by peers, right? I've met so many people who think pairing is, a way for a senior person to teach a junior person, but that's not true at all. Pairing is at its best when it's done by peers, especially when those peers are bringing in different experiences to the table. Like I'm bringing in JavaScript and you're bringing in Spring Boot. But there are occasions when you get to something where one person knows a lot and the other person doesn't know much about it, like I am with Spring Boot and like you are with Node.js. I'm not suggesting we do this now, but one of the most effective ways I've seen for using pairing to teach is to make sure that the more junior person is at the keyboard.
Yes. Yeah.
And not only that, it's tempting then for the more senior person to say, okay, now do this, now do this, now do that. But actually to let the more junior person drive the pace.
Yeah.
Let them say, okay, what do I need to do, and explain and sort of have them guide it. Because if you're just using them as hands on a keyboard,
if you're just using them as a really good AI for type, is actually a mediocre AI, because I think AI can sometimes do it better.
And it's deeply unsatisfying to be somebody else's hands.
And it goes to sort of some of the guidelines of an ensemble. It's like, give high level directions, give really high level, the highest level you can. And if the driver, the person with the hands on the keyboard, says, I'm not sure what to do next, then you can start giving, okay, well, here's what we want to do. Okay, I'm not sure how to do that, until you're at the point of, okay, type this.
Yeah.
But at that point, like you've let the person maybe make some mistakes, maybe try some things out. But you're always sort of saying, here's our high level goal, and drill down only as needed.
And if you are the less experienced person in this scenario, and you're at the keyboard, exercise your control of the keyboard. Don't just do what the other person says. Make sure, like, it's on you to make sure you understand what's going on.
Right.
Before you type it in.
Right. Because if you're just typing it and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm typing, or I've just finished typing and now I have no idea what it is, you must ask a question, say, okay, what did I just type here? What does this mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But we're not going to do that. I'm just going to go. So I'm thinking we're making HTTP client test. And
did you want a .js.ts?
I do not. Did I type in .js?
Yes, you did.
And let's bring in our tests from my test framework. And how does that work? We're going to export the test, and it's going to give us a describe. And it will also give us an it. So let's start with that. It runs tests. Go. See if this actually does anything. Hey, it's totally working.
All right.
But it's running all the tests. Why is it running all the tests? Oh no, there it goes. Figured out. I don't know why it didn't figure out the dependencies right away, but they're figured out now. Are the sounds coming through?
It's very, very. I can hear them. So if I can hear them, other people can hear them.
I turned it up a little bit, but your voice is coming through the same speaker. So let me know if there starts being some feedback.
Yep.
Okay, so oh great, glad to hear check and hear it. Maybe turn that down just a little bit.
So what's sorry, I'm going to ask you about what's the describe for?
So one of the things I really like about Mocha, which is where I first saw this, but I think it came actually from the BDD folks in Ruby and maybe in RSpec, is you can have nested suites of tests.
Oh, okay. So it's for nesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So describe says,
Right. So you'd wrap a bunch of its with a describe. Okay.
Yeah. And actually in Mocha and most test tools, you start at the top level with describe as well. But I've always found that kind of annoying because you have to give it some sort of name. But really, the way I do my tests, HTTP client is the test for HTTP client.
Right.
So
Right.
like repeating that name, it just becomes a maintenance problem because now when I rename the things,
it doesn't get renamed.
I have to go find it. So yeah, my test framework just has test at the top.
Is that what you're going to call it? My test framework?
MTF. It needs to be WTF. So we'll call it Wholesome test framework.
All right, there you go.
Very wholesome. Yeah. Or WTF for short. The speed of the tests, which are very important, can be WTFs per minute.
Exactly.
Which we all know is like one of the core metrics for quality. All right. Yeah, Suiji, this is one of my favorite things, is there is no magic in this framework. All this is calling a function, it's returning a test result or a test something, which then can be run. No, actually, this is returning a test suite, which you can run, and then the test suite returns a test result.
Okay.
Yeah. And it returns is just adding a test case to that test suite is all it's doing. It's taking this function and saying it's in the test suite now. Okay, so I've been complaining about not having proper integration tests for HTTP. I want to do that.
All right.
I want to do a proper integration test over HTTP. So let's say that it, what does it do? It makes HTTP requests. And in order to do that, well, we're going to need to spawn a HTTP server.
Oh, okay.
Because we need to have, if we're going to make a request against a server in our test, we're going to have a server to make requests against.
Right.
And let me go ahead and pull up the Node.js documentation. But I always do that. I think that's the documentation link. I have so many copies of Node downloaded to my computer.
25 downloads.
So HTTP, what we want to do is we want to create a server. And here we go. How do we do that? I've done this a million times, but I have to sort of remember by myself how to do it every single time. Do we just say new server? I think we do. Let's try that. So we're going to import that. We're going to say import server from node HTTP. Doesn't seem right. I think it's like node.create http.create server. There it is. Because generally in Node, you don't ever instantiate a class. You always call a function that returns an instance of that class for you.
Right.
Okay. We're going to import HTTP from node HTTP. Why is that giving us an error?
I was going to ask, what is up with that? I'm not familiar with that. What's a colon way of importing? Is that?
That's a newer feature in Node to prevent supply chain attacks.
Oh, okay.
We could just say import from HTTP, but
do we have that in our package JSON, or is that just default part of it?
It's part of Node.
Okay.
And since our test's running in Node, it should just work.
Okay.
So, yeah. The reason it's complaining is because IntelliJ doesn't know.
IntelliJ doesn't know that it's automatically there. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a little bit weird because technically our front end code is not Node code, but when it's running its tests, it is running in Node.
Right, right.
So I don't know about that. Okay, so now we need to take the server. Okay, this can be annoying not having this in here.
Can we tell it to import it?
Let me try this.
Yeah, it's just not aware of it.
Maybe what we need to do is in our module, we need to tell it that the front end is using HTTP, is using Node.
That
How do we
would
do
probably
that?
be a facet, I think, is the way they do it. So there is no facet for the front end. Yeah, I'm not sure. Because most of that stuff's oriented towards the back end Java stuff.
Right. And I've been using WebStorm. I actually own now a copy of WebStorm and a copy of IntelliJ, which it turns out you have to pay for them separately, even though it's WebStorm is a sub.
Okay.
Yeah. So Chad, if you can figure out how I can get WebStorm to be aware that we're using Node, that would be super helpful. Let me just try one more thing. Oh. Maybe I just did it. Maybe I didn't. I'm a little worried now. What did that button do?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, so we've created the server. Let's say server.start. I've got to do it this way. So I think we say server.start or server.listen. Server.listen.
Mm-hmm.
And we tell it the port. So I think I'll go with 8080. Maybe I'll go with 5011.
Yeah, I was going to say do something that we might not be stumbling on.
Yeah. I think a really sophisticated test would actually like loop through the ports.
Right.
And in a team environment, sometimes you need to do that because different people have different things on their machines. But I generally just hard code it, and then when it becomes a problem, I'll fix it.
Yeah.
And then we can say server.on listening, and that will run a function. We should say, see here, server started. It is.
All right. Can I?
The problem with this. So go ahead.
I was just going to try something in the preferences. So frameworks, JavaScript, libraries. Yeah, so here's Node.js core, but I'm not sure what that means.
Try so it's partially enabled. Maybe try clicking manage scopes on that. Yeah, it might have been enabled just for the build package before. So what happens when you hit OK?
Does it help us out? Anything here? No. All right.
Oh, well.
I won't sidetrack us too much.
So you'll notice that we've started the server, but we've got a little problem here, which is that we haven't stopped the server.
That's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's happening is now, if I do a build quick, I believe what we'll see is that it's never exiting.
So it doesn't get sort of garbage collected in any way?
Well, once the server starts, the process doesn't exit until the server stops. And I'm not stopping the server.
Okay, so it's its own totally its own process. Okay.
It's technically it's a thread, I think, but yeah. Looking at the chat, the node prefix is fairly new, but definitely supported because I'm doing all this. What's funny is that in the build code, let's see if I can find. Yeah, I'm doing things like node events, and it's working fine there. So
yeah, I wonder if it's a bit lost because you've got sort of two node modules.
Yeah, or maybe because front end is a separate package or separate module.
From the build stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway, I'm just going to keep on rolling.
Yeah.
So now what we need to do is, what we've done here is we've got a bunch of code that starts the server. We're going to wrap that all in a promise. So we can resolve it. And await it. And that way we have async if we're going to do that. That way now, once we're listening, the execution will continue down here rather than inside here. Server started. We still haven't stopped it, but now instead of writing the stop code inside of here, which we would have had to do, now we can do the same thing, except we can say await new promise, resolve, reject. And we can say server. Oops, let's
need to promote that.
We can say server.close, which will stop the server. And we can say server.onClose. We'll resolve here. And we'll say the server has been stopped. And now, server starts, server stops. Can't explain that.
So the await basically waits for the promise to be resolved.
Yeah. So what's happening?
And you're resolving it as soon as the listening happens, and then you're doing it again as soon as the close happens. You basically return. So you're basically blocking on the listening and blocking on the close.
Yeah, except it's not blocking the thread. Technically, what's happening is the await saying everything after the await is going into a new function.
Right.
And it will run that function after the await is done. Or actually everything after the await starting here.
Right.
And then same thing for the second await. So without the awaits, and back in the bad old days when I first started programming JavaScript, you'd end up with these massive, they call it a pyramid of doom, massive indents as each thing will like indent further and further.
Right.
And the await allows you to get rid of that.
Right.
Yeah, so let's, Dota's saying in the comments that has no idea how this works. Let me show you. If we do a console log A here, this is going to run. And then this is going to run after everything inside the promise. So we're going to see this run second. And then this run third. And then this is going to run here. And then the same thing. This is going to run first. It's going to run immediately. It's going to create the promise and run everything inside of it. But then the promise isn't going to resolve. The await's not going to execute until resolve is called.
Right.
So that will happen here. And then once the promise resolves, then we will come back out and continue here.
Right.
And if I did that right, we should see those come out in order. B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is a little bit of brain bender. And at this point, I've done quite a bit of Node.js code. So it's all sort of figured out for me, but it took me a long time to work it all out.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help that await and the async keywords are really just syntactic sugar.
Yes.
What's really happening,
yeah,
which I won't bother explaining, but
yeah,
unless people really want to know. But the nice thing about JavaScript is it does have everything mostly is syntactic sugar. Even classes are syntactic sugar for some low-level stuff.
Yeah.
And if you take the time to figure out what's happening low level, you can kind of, it's very predictable, except for type coercion, which is a mess. But other than that, it's a very predictable language. It's just one of the things I like about it. I also love the way they do concurrency because you don't have to worry about race conditions in the same way. Other than the await, the code's guaranteed not to be interrupted, which means I can listen for the event after I start. There's no race condition there because this code is guaranteed to run after this code,
after that code,
and before the listening event fires.
Right.
No, Dota, the then is what's actually happening. The then isn't syntactic sugar. It's just a method call with a callback, registering a callback. Okay, so there's our server started. So now what we can do is we can do the HTTP request.
And you want to do server.request?
What'd you say?
Are we calling it the request on server or on HTTP?
Actually, we're calling fetch.
Oh, we created the server, and now we're going to fetch something against that server. Got it.
Yeah, so we're using a trick I'm sure you're familiar with, which is we're going to write all the code in the test.
Yes.
And then we're going to factor out the production code.
Right.
Once we have it figured out. And the reason we're doing this is because in this infrastructure stuff, I mean, it's going really smoothly because I've done this a million times at this point. But normally it's like, tear your head out. Why isn't this thing working? Why isn't that thing working? If we just do it on the test, then we can see it all together and kind of work it out.
Yep.
Yeah, the Clancy, the reason is because it's running in the background. And so we need to have some way of being informed when it's done. And we don't have to put a wait on it. We could just put our code right inside here, but then we end up with that nested pyramid of doom. So I have done this a million times in Node, but I have not done it in the browser. The fetch API is actually newish.
Yes, it's relatively newish, yeah.
And by newish, I think like within the last 5 years. So it just shows you how out of date I am.
Yeah.
But if we look up the fetch API, do we want to read the instructions or just jump to the API?
I think we could just jump to the API.
Okay.
So we use the fetch method.
HTTP request.
Yeah, good old XHR.
Okay, so fetch. So it returns a promise, which is nice. Rejects when a network error is encountered. Does not reject on HTTP errors. Okay, that's good. Well, this is really straightforward. We should be able to say fetch HTTP localhost port. And that is going to return we got a method, we got headers, we got a body, mode, credentials, okay, blah, blah, blah.
So so that returns a promise, and then what do we do with that?
Well, we should be able
to await it. Yep.
We did get a type error, fetch failed. But our test still passed. That's weird. You know why it failed? The test passed? It's because we didn't await the promise, and so the promise rejected probably after. Is it fetch.get? I think it's just fetch, but I could be wrong on that. There we go. Making the request, it timed out the request, and killed the process, so the server is not running, I believe. We'll check that. Oh, nope, it didn't kill the server.
Oh, did the timeout?
The timeout. So when the fetch failed, it threw an exception, so this code never ran.
Oh.
So I think what we should do before we get too much further on this, I think we should factor stuff out.
Yeah.
Put this in a method called
create server
for all.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what I called it.
So Dota, general headers are, most of the headers are optional, so you don't have to always pass them.
Yeah, that's right. That should still work. Compile fail.
That's right. It defaults to a get it unless you set the method to something else, and that's why we didn't have to specify the method.
Okay, server working. So now we can move the closing down of the server to after all.
Right.
First we'll need to. The reason I'm using before all and after all is so that we only start the server once for all of our tests. But now I think when this times out, our test will actually that's interesting.
Why did we get 2 timeouts?
After all timed out.
After all timed out.
So, so yeah, what's happening here is it's saying the test timed out and the after all timed out.
Now, why would the after all time out?
I think the fetch caused the server the connection's open to the server, is my guess. Let me try killing that and seeing what happens. Yeah, so the before all and after all are working correctly. But the fetch is opening a connection from the client to the server. And when the server is seeing that, it's just hanging out there. So what we need to do is we need to implement server dot in the when we set up the server, we need to listen for requests.
Oh, so you can't, if it's processing a request, you can't.
It'd probably time out the request after 30 seconds or something like that. But yeah, it's not going to close the server while something's in process.
Okay.
Okay, so we have to do on this request, we have to tell it to resume. What that does is says, don't worry about reading the request body. And then let's go ahead and write receiving requests here. Resume it, and then we'll say request.onEnd. Request received. And that's Okay. If we enable that fetch again, this might work this time because now we've got it like properly handling the request on the server.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Server received the request. But the server didn't respond. So we need to deal with that.
So it fully handled the request, but we never did anything with it, so we didn't
We
finish.
never sent anything back to the client.
Right.
It may be the client that's hanging is causing our test to not close. I'm not sure. We can send the response just by saying,
there we go.
That's promising.
What turned out? The client returned.
Our server still isn't closing though, and I don't know why.
Did eventually stop though. Yeah.
Huh. Let's so the request finished. It's attempting to stop right away. And eventually we do get the server stopped.
Is the close the right thing to send? To listen on?
It works if we're not doing the fetch.
Oh, okay.
So if we take out the fetch, it does work.
Right.
There's the server stopped.
Right.
And also, you'll see that it's saying server stopped after it times out.
Right.
So let's change the timeout of our tests. To be more like 10 seconds. Now we're getting to the deep magic of the WTF, Wholesome Test Framework. And I don't know if that's actually how it works. Apparently not. Yeah, on being declared after we close isn't a problem, Dota, because there's no race conditions in JavaScript. I mean, the code is single-threaded. This line is guaranteed to run after this line. I shouldn't say there's no race conditions, but
there's no interruption that's going to happen.
Yeah. I don't know if I ever coded timeout to work on after all and before all. Thought I did. Let me try one more thing here. Only the idiot who wrote this thing documented it.
Yeah.
There it is. So yeah, the timeout operates at the suite level, not at the test level. Okay. So what's happening is it's taking 5 seconds to close.
That seems like a long time.
Yeah, it does. And it may be that fetch does some sort of connection pooling.
Fetch probably would do that, is my guess.
Yep. Yeah. If I've got the timeout set to 5 seconds, it works. If I have it set to more than 5 seconds, it fails. Okay. Hey, Suiji, are you saying that oh, we do have a TS config. It's just not where WebStorm thinks it is.
Oh, because it's not inside the front end module, so it doesn't apply it?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the TS config is. Actually.
It's in the root. Yeah, it's right there.
In the root. Yeah, and eventually I was going to put it in the build config, although I haven't gotten that far yet.
So if you do that and then copy it into front end, would that fix it?
There's a TS config. Nope. Well, let's not worry too much about that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our documentation for fetch. We've got options here. Method, headers, body. See, now this is what I like for an API. You know how I was complaining about Spring Boot's, method, headers, body. Boom, boom, boom. Done. The important things. Cache, redirect. This is a pretty nice API. Keep alive. You know what else is probably happening here? We're probably using nodes fetch.
Oh, yeah. How would we be using the browser one if it's not running in the browser?
Well, nodes. That's a good question.
Yeah, because basically stuff like window and document and so on are in. And isn't that also a bit dangerous because you're not using the fetch that's actually running in the browser?
It is a little bit dangerous. Yeah. But the costs of running in a real browser are so high in terms of
Sure.
timings and so forth. I don't think we have node fetch installed, Suiji, but maybe we do. It could have been installed by a dependency.
So how is fetch possibly working unless somebody pulled it in?
Well,
unless it's in by default these days.
I mean, obviously it's a global, otherwise it wouldn't work.
Right.
I'm not seeing a search for fetch or a search for the node documentation. Oh, but you know what there is there's a way to see it on one page. No experimental fetch. Thanks.
That was not helpful.
No. Okay.
So is that experimental and we are getting it?
I think we are getting it. It's under the globals. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Fetch. Browser compatible implementation of the fetch function.
Okay. So that's how we're getting it, because it's experimental.
So I think we should be able to pass this keep alive option as false, and that might fix our problem. Oh, that didn't fix our problem.
Well, I was going to say, what is the default for keep alive? I would think it's not. I would think it's false anyway. And I wish it would tell us what the default is.
It does somewhere. MDN documentation is usually really good.
Yeah, that's why one of the things I like to see is like, especially for optional parameters, which all these options are, to tell us what the defaults are.
I agree. I'm a little surprised that it's not,
because it gives you some of the defaults in the guide of using the fetch API, but it doesn't give you the defaults for all of them.
Okay. So why is it? Because we can't have it waiting 5 seconds. That's going to kill our developer experience. But
the fetch is coming back quickly, so it seems like it's the shutting down of the server that's the problem. No?
Well, I think the reason the server's not shutting down is because we're maintaining a connection to, I think we're maintaining our connection to the server is what's happening.
So fetch is opening up the connection and it's keeping the connection open even though it's done with the fetch.
Mm-hmm.
Even though keep alive is false.
Well, if you look in the documentation, it says that keep alive, compatibility unknown.
Well, I would presume that they grabbed it from Chrome or from Chromium or something. They're not going to just write a new one.
That's not a sure thing.
Oh. That seems like a really bad idea to write one from scratch.
Well,
with different defaults.
I think because it's in Node.js, they're presumably going to match the real API, but they have their own needs, including compatibility with their HTTP.get or HTTP.request. So it's probably different code because it's not in the browser. Browser implementation is going to defer to whatever the browser's network layer is, and Node.js doesn't have that same network layer.
So if we want, there's also the server.close. Server.stop, which apparently shuts it down. So close stops accepting new connections, but keeps the current connection open. And so if we just say stop, it'll just stop.
Where do you see server.stop?
In an article, but maybe it's not actually.
Maybe part of, so it's inheriting from net.server. That's got a server.close. No, there's no server.close. Suiji says, try to respond with a connection close header. I don't know if I like that long term, but let's try it to see if that helps us understand what's going on here. So we're going to send the response. So we're going to say response.setHeader connection close. Get that right? Yep, name value. Oh, that was it. Yeah, so it's definitely keeping the connection alive. So yeah, sending connection close is not actually terrible.
Yeah, so it looks like you would have to actually grab the sockets and close them, is what it looks like.
Which you can do, like we could listen for the on connection.
Right.
But sending the connection close,
I think that's much cleaner.
that. Okay. Now we're doing good. 54 milliseconds. That's what I like to see.
There we go.
I'll take the timeout back out. Don't need that anymore. I've never run into this before, and I don't know if that's because it's just a difference between HTTP request, the way HTTP request works, or because we're doing it incrementally and there's some other thing that automatically causes connection close to be set.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm not going to worry about it. So, well, actually, I think we've demonstrated that we know how fetch works.
At least for the very simple case of a get where we're throwing away the response, yeah.
Yeah. So I think what we can do now is we can start looking at, well, let's start asking ourselves, what do we want our, I guess what we need to do is look at the response here, right?
Yeah, because eventually, I mean, we're more concerned about post than get, but
That's a good point. So a response has
so it's got status.
Oh, look at all that timing info. That's kind of cool. Headers, body. Shall we make it work with a post?
How about we do an assert that the response we get has the status of 200, so that way we are sure that we know what we're doing. Because we'll want a 200 anyway for the other response.
Okay, that's working.
All right.
Let's make it tell us it's a teapot.
I thought that was 418.
You might be right. What's 429?
I think 429 is you've exceeded your API and you need to throttle.
Oh, you might be right.
Scary that we know some of this. Yes, good old HTTP cats.
Yep, I'm a teapot.
Yep.
Too many requests. It's 429. Okay, so here we're going to say response dot status code equals 418. There we go. Let's set some headers, some more headers.
So like content type?
Yeah, let's do content type. That's a good one.
Since we're actually going to need that one.
Actually, before I set it there.
Yeah, let's drive it.
Well, we should see connection close. Oh, it's a headers list.
What does that mean?
I don't know. Let's take a look at the documentation. Response body, response headers, headers object.
So it's headers.entries, or we could do a for each, or has.
So what we want to do in order for this to work with a deep equal, we want to convert it to an object. So I think what we want to do is say object.from entries response.headers.entries. There we go. We're expecting connection close, but we're getting connection close, content length of 0, a date, and other stuff we don't care about.
Right.
So I'm going to take this and I'm going to factor it into a variable called headers. And I'm going to delete the content length. And I'm going to delete the
The
date.
date. Okay. The content length might be useful, but for now, yeah, why not?
I mean, it's really about what are we
Right.
consciously setting.
Yeah.
So, okay, so now we're going to assert that we've got, I think you said connection or
content type.
Content type.
All right, and then we'll uncomment what you wrote. Yep.
Okay, doing good.
All right.
Okay, what else do we need to do?
Well, we'll need the body.
A response body. Yep. Okay, so let's go ahead and send a body. Order status header body, my body. Does that work for you?
Yeah, but let's implement the test first.
Right.
So at the
with that because I took out the end.
Right.
So we're going to assert
response dot response dot body.
Ooh, except it's a readable stream. Back to the documentation.
So we could resolve it immediately into JSON using response.json, but I'm not sure if that's what we want to do. It's probably eventually what we want to do.
You see that somewhere?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, it's response.text.
Interesting that that's a promise. I wonder why that uses a promise.
Don't all of them use a promise?
Oh, you know why it's a promise? It's because the body...
Because the body is going to be read in as a stream.
Readable stream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because who knows how long that body can be.
Yeah, and it could trickle in and so forth. So yeah, I think converting that directly to JSON is what we want, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Let's change our test then. Instead of returning my body, let's return it as...
Let's write that, yeah. So response.body, response.json as a method, yeah. Right.
Okay, unexpected end of JSON input
because there was nothing. Yep.
And then here in the end, we can say a JSON.stringify. Okay, I expected that to work. That didn't work because we didn't do a deep equal.
Oh, okay.
They are not literally equal.
Right.
Therefore, it failed.
Equal.
Okay. That's kind of everything. I think we should start factoring this out into our actual production code.
Do we want to make it now be an actual post? Because I think right now it's still a get.
Yes. But also we need to start turning all these content console logs into asserts.
Yes.
So yeah, what we need to do here is the server. I want to factor that out into a class that we can make assertions on what was the last request you received.
Okay.
So let's take our break
Yep.
and do that when we get back.
Sounds good.
Yeah, WTF probably should have said something like that, Suji.
All right, I'll see you after the break.
So what we are going to do is we are going to factor out our server here to give us the ability to make assertions on what kind of request was sent, because of course that's the important thing here.
Right. Yes.
So I want to make a class server. Maybe we'll call that a spy server, because we're going to spy on the requests. And let's see, I want to move this in gradually. Let's do this.
So what is the underscore? Is that just a naming convention, or does that do something
That's
special?
just a naming convention for a private variable.
Okay. So private and a naming convention?
Well, because JavaScript doesn't have private variables,
right.
That's a naming convention I've always used. But you're right. Now that we're in TypeScript, we don't necessarily need it.
It's very belt and suspenders.
What'd you say?
It's very belt and suspenders way of looking at it.
No, it's honestly just habit.
Yeah.
You still hear me okay? I just had a weird thing pop up from video. Okay, so we should be able to say const server equals new spy server as an HTTP server.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And we should be able to say now we should be able to, what I want to do is,
how do you want to access the spy server's contents from the test?
Yeah, I'm just sort of trying to figure out how I want to factor this over.
Mm-hmm.
I want to move the http.create server into the constructor and say it like that. Not sure what error is happening here. Oh.
Yeah, I was just about to say that looks like an any.
Yeah. Fine.
Is it
We'll work out the typing issues later.
Yeah.
Probably I have to import the type definitions for Node.
Right.
Okay.
So now you don't have to pass that in as a parameter.
Instead, I'll say HTTP server equals server.http server.
Right. On 17, we want to delete this.
Perfect. Thank you. And line 11, HTTP server is not defined. Yeah, actually, JavaScript does not have implicit this. So
I was about to say, it's like, that was
a
what I'm used to.
error. Okay, so looks like everything's still working. So now I should be able to put this all into a method.
So that'll become our constructor, or
yeah.
Well,
not our constructor.
Some kind of start.
Yeah, start is what I was thinking. Okay, what's it complaining about? Okay, I think I can get rid of all of that.
Yeah, it looks like it just didn't have the type information. I think you replaced one too many.
I'll just
fix that one.
Manually.
Without the underscore? Yeah.
Check out my fancy stack trace highlighting that I put into WTF. It's complaining that HTTP server is undefined.
Is that because start async is not inside the class?
Right. So that's why we had to pass it through. But that's right. I'll just put it in here. And then I should be able to, let me get rid of that. Here, say server.startAsync. And that worked. I don't know if you can hear the dinging noises, but it did work. So I don't need to pass that through anymore.
Right. Yep.
Good. So now I can do the same thing for stop async. And I don't know why it's giving me all this. Oh, that's the types.
That's the type stuff that it's not it knows about but doesn't import. I don't get that.
Yeah, it knows about it, but it doesn't know about it.
Split brains, half of it knows about it.
Yeah. It should fail because we're not calling server dot.
You're missing either one too many or not enough closing braces. Oh, the function. That's why. That stuff confuses me.
And we don't need this.
All right. Oh. Yeah. Underscore. Yep.
Okay. There we go. I think that's it.
So 56 do we need? Yep.
Okay. So what we need to do, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the class and I'm going to move it down to the bottom.
At what point would you move it to a separate when you have multiple tests needing it?
Never.
No, never. You just put everything in here.
We shouldn't end up with multiple tests.
Because everything that uses it would be in here?
Yeah. There's only one class that should ever need a SPY server, and that's this one.
Right.
Now, if we ended up with socket.io, maybe, but I think its server would look different. So
yeah, I think the server would definitely be quite different.
Yeah, but in the event that there was multiple, then yeah, I'd split it out at that point. So I think what we need to do is we need the ability to say what the last response was, or the last request.
The last request, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to make a last request, and I'll worry about typing later. And in the constructor, I suppose as long as I'm in here.
Do we want to make that private or give it a type for the HTTP server?
Hold on one second. I moved the code to the bottom and now it's not passing anymore. Oh.
Is it because you have a class in the same file?
I don't know. That looks like a flaw in WTF. It's failing fast, which is good, but
not failing usefully.
Well, it is failing usefully. I just don't understand why there's for some reason, IntelliJ isn't highlighting this link here. But I believe that it does have 2 source map links in it. I just don't know why.
it's got a JSX config pragma as a source. That's weird.
That's extremely weird.
So the React create element source, is it pulling in? Yeah, because like that line is that source is the source for the TS, and then
Yeah.
it's like there's React somewhere. And it had to do with the order that you did things, right? Because when it was at top, it was fine. SpyServer is not a constructor.
Okay, this is exceedingly weird. So it's defining SpyServer. So the way classes, okay. There's something about our config where it's not using modern JavaScript. And so it's building it as a constructor function, and it's doing it as a variable rather than as a class. And so it's not being hoisted, which means it's not does not exist prior to the function being run.
Right.
I don't know why that is, but if we look at our compiler, we might be able to figure it out.
Yeah, so Dota, this is a compiler issue, not I mean, technically with the declaration, it hid the fact that it wasn't compiling it using a class.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not compiling it correctly, but configuration, compilation.
Is target what we need? So this is target ES5. Is that something that it has a different
that's
default?
what we're missing. That goes under parser, transform target.
Oh, you have target ES5.
Oh,
right there on line 16. All right. Well, it's not ES6. It's ES. Pick your year. Oh, that's right. They went to year based standards. That didn't help.
It didn't.
Suiji, I think it was the same message.
Oh, it's definitely better though. Check this out.
Yeah.
Oops, that's the wrong one. Infrastructure, HTTP client.
Yeah, that's definitely better.
It's definitely better. That's tons better, in fact.
Yeah.
That's actually readable.
Yeah. It's pretty much what we wrote.
It is, but so why is it cannot access SpyServer before initialization?
I don't know what that means. Reference error. It's line 7. We're trying to instantiate it. But shouldn't we be able to access it?
You'd think so.
Oh yeah, Suiji, it's better, but it's still a problem.
So what I've done is I've moved the export to the bottom just in case that's what's causing our problem.
Right.
Huh. I have to admit, I'm a little bit at a loss. Let me undo some of the mucking about we did here. I'm also not sure why it's running all the tests, but so it's definitely failing here. We've got a class SpyServer. That should be being hoisted so that I guess it's not. Well,
I see. I was looking at SWC, and something says about this error occurs for CommonJS, but not for ESM.
but this is actually a ESM.
Yeah, so that's.
That's a good question, Suiji. It should not make a difference, but I'm going to try it. And now the lint is not happy with
Right.
Having it outside the Lambda means it should be
top level.
defined before it's used, because when we call test, all it's doing is taking the Lambda and stuffing it in a variable. It's not running it. So if we say A, B, C, it should be running in this order. Oh, yes. It does run this code immediately. It's the before all and after all that don't get run immediately.
So you can't initialize it there? You have to do it in the before all. Oh.
That's a tricky one.
Right, because if it didn't have the before all, then it would delay it.
What'd you say?
So if you didn't use the before all, would it have then delayed sort of?
No, the way it works, and the way actually most test frameworks work that use this format, is defining the suite runs all the functions in the suite, because
Oh, right. Yes.
that's how the tests are defined.
Sure.
So yeah, that was actually, I think, my bad. It was just confused by having multiple layers of compilation and build steps and stuff.
Yeah.
That was a legit error. Yeah. Thank you, Dota. And Suiji, for your help on that.
So how would you make that more obvious?
I don't know.
Because yeah, that's one of those you either know it or you don't almost kind of things.
Yeah, and I thought classes were hoisted. Hoisted just means that if it starts with a keyword class or function, it's moved to the top of the file so that it's read in order.
Right.
I thought classes were hoisted, but maybe that memory was wrong. Yeah, Staircase, this is going to be a web-based RPG. In fact, we have a lovely, lovely prototype here. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, so we've got React on the front end, Spring Boot on the back, talking to the OpenAI that's going to generate the dialogue. And right now we're just writing tests for implementing the front end that's going to talk to the Spring Boot backend. So that's where we're at.
Well, and Suiji, I think, so the reason I have problems with cross-compilation and why I'm not sold on TypeScript is because of these sorts of things. The more moving parts you have in your build system, the more difficult it is to figure out when something goes wrong, why it went wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that's generally true for the more layers you have, the more layers that you don't understand, because you're building abstractions on top of abstractions that if you don't understand, then yeah.
Exactly. So let's see. You didn't like the underscore. I agree. It's not necessary. We can just make it private.
Right.
And read only as well. And then we'll also make a private last request. And we'll set this.last request equal to I think null, as we don't have a last request.
Do we want to do a commit before we do this last request thing?
I was starting to feel a little itchy that we hadn't committed for a while. So yeah,
especially since we just fixed something and we got it working.
Yeah. So what have we done here? Do you know why I have untracked files on the back end?
Probably some of the playing around we did with the library mappings. The back end. That's because it's a directory.
Right. And did you change the bundling to
yes? So the bundling puts stuff in the static. So it'll create the directory, but basically it ignores the contents. So that way we don't commit the contents.
Okay. It's a git add.
Yeah, and it shouldn't
put those in there.
It shouldn't have.
I'm just going to delete those for now because.
Yeah. I mean, we can double check the git ignore in the back end. It should have.
We should have a git ignore.
Yeah, it is ignoring it.
I think.
Did I not write it correctly?
Main resources. Static.
Source main resources static. So you don't know. So what we want is we wanted src. I must have typed Java by accident. I think I always do that. I always make that mistake.
Oh, there it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just check that in.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we have
fixed the ignore for static.
Ignore. You must have changed the build to.
I changed the paths. Yeah, that was one of the commits I did.
Okay, so now it's no longer going into the generated directory, and it's going into the backend directory.
Yep.
Nice. Okay. And what we got? We have initial prototyping of fetch API for front end. Okay, where were we? What were we going to do next?
And so now we're going to work on the last request.
Right. So we've got a last request. So if we come down here, we've got a request here. I think I can take out some of these logs now.
Yeah.
What we want to do is say last request status equals status of request dot. Does it have a status? No, it doesn't. It's going to be a method.
The request doesn't have a status. Yeah.
Request method.
Mm-hmm.
The headers are going to be the request headers. And the body we won't worry about right now.
Right, because there won't be one right just yet.
Okay, and it's complaining at me because...
Do we mean this dot?
We mean this dot last request. Okay. So over here, we should be able to assert that the server.lastRequest,
which we'll have to provide an accessor for, or do we just want to make it public?
I'd probably, let's do it public to begin with, but remind me to make an accessor because we don't want it to be writable.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've got the server last request, and we're saying that the method should be get, and the headers should be.
Oh, do we want the URL as well?
Yeah, we do want the URL, but let's get this much working.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's our.
Those are the default headers.
Okay. Guess we'll just document those, right?
Oh, that's interesting that the keep alive is true as a default.
Yeah.
I thought
I took that back out.
Oh, you took that back out. Okay.
But you know what would be interesting to do is to set that keep alive flag and see what happens.
Yes. Because I'm honestly a little doubtful that it actually did what we thought it did. Yeah,
same. Which is, of course, why I love these integration tests, because we get to figure out exactly what's happening.
Yeah. What the heck is that name for a user agent?
I think it's just an open source project of some sort.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so if we change the fetch to say keep alive, false, does not actually set the keep alive header.
Well, that's a lie. That's a horrible what?
Just like the cake.
Oh man.
Thanks, Node. Well, they did say it's experimental, so. All right.
Well, we probably want to keep alive anyway, so this is probably fine.
It probably is fine. Okay, so now what?
How about we
URL,
assert
right?
against the URL as well?
Yeah.
Which I guess in this case is just slash or empty.
I think it's just the path because we don't know the full URL.
Oh, yes, right, because the URL, the only part we care about here is the path, yeah.
So that's failing for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm. So add it to our request. It is path, yep.
Path is undefined.
Yes, because we did not set it on our call.
The path should still be coming in as a slash.
Oh, it's undefined. Undefined.
Yeah, so I think that's the wrong variable name.
So Dota, the keep alive is not going to make the tests fast just yet because we're only doing one request. And honestly, the socket connection stuff is not what slows you down for a few tests.
Incoming message. Oh, it's URL.
Really? So then what the heck was that path thing? From somewhere it
there we go.
Up?
There's our path. Should we call it URL to avoid confusion?
I guess, even though it's not really a URL.
Yeah, let's call it path. So what we need to do is up here, we'll make this into a path.
Mm-hmm.
That passed.
All right. Do we want to
what
make?
What are we doing next?
Make last request into a getter, or a query, not a getter. A query instead of a public access.
Yeah, thanks. So
I'm surprised IntelliJ doesn't have a way to automatically do that.
This is why we have an underscore.
Oh, yes. Because, right.
Okay. So there we go. I think we want to do the body as well. In fact, let's make this a post. And then here, I think we just say method.
Yeah, method : post.
Post. That worked, but now our accept encoding has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. Content, it's added the content length.
Yeah. Because we posted an empty body, it automatically put the content length at 0.
Okay. And should we do the body as well?
Yes.
Okay.
That should just be body.
Let's pull this out into
options. So that'll fail. Oh, we'll have to change our content length too.
Oh, because
we now have a body. So the content length that we're sending is 7 characters.
Okay, I thought you said content type, but no.
Oh, sorry.
But it looks like it is setting a content type on us now.
I thought didn't we set that somewhere?
No, that's just on the response that we're setting the content type.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, so I guess we should probably explicitly set our content type.
Yeah, let's.
What are we going to send? We're probably going to send JSON.
Yeah, send JSON.
Dude.
Work. You got to do this for me automatically.
Oh.
It didn't. So how do we do headers with our options for the fetch API? Headers. Object literal with string values. Perfect.
So I think it's just do the same thing. Content type.
Does fetch have a simplified way of sending JSON? I don't
Oh, you
see
mean
it.
in the same way that we'd had? No, I think we just have to do the stringify.
Yeah. I'm going to also add a custom header.
All right.
We're going to expect a content type. Let's see. Of application JSON. Good.
Mm-hmm.
And a my header of
my value. Yeah.
my value. That's good. Except is the same, except language is the same. The diffing algorithm I have here is quite simple. It just looks line by line. So
yeah. Content. Let's do the content length after we change our body. Do we want our body to actually be JSON? Do we care?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I think we do care.
Yeah.
So our body is going to be a JSON stringify my request body. Okay with that?
Yep. And we'll take our content length and put it in there.
32. Okay, and then we need the body. Okay, so my body has to be stored in the here.
Right.
This is actually a little bit tricky. Remember how I did this request.resume to ignore the body? What we're actually going to do is we're going to say
do it anymore. So I guess it automatically handles the chunking for us.
So yeah, Node will just send in this event every time it gets a chunk of data streaming in. And we're just going to take all of that. We're going to collate it. And then once it's done, then we will send it back.
Yep. You want to assign it to body? On line 900,
oh, this is called object shorthand.
Oh, it already is that. Okay, right. Got it.
So body is equivalent to body. Okay, and it's failed because we got the wrong. We specified the wrong result.
Yep, I expected that to happen.
Fine.
You need 10 more characters.
What'd you say?
Chad is asking for 10 more characters so it can be a content length of 42.
Oh, they are absolutely right.
But won't that be confusing that we'll assume 42 is some magic value?
Yeah, because we actually do use 42 as no such value. Yeah. Okay, there we go.
All right.
That joke was awful. I don't even remember which joke it was. Maybe the 10 more characters joke. I think we can check this in.
I think so.
Yeah, so we fetch prototype asserts on request details.
Do you want to say that we change it to a post, or is that not important?
I don't think that's super
Okay.
relevant yet.
Yeah.
Okay. What's next?
Well, let's look at our README. Where are we in our?
Oh, well, we're not even done.
So we're still working on the fetch wrapper. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So we have the ability to make a request, get the last request, compare all the headers and bodies in the request.
We are hard coding the response. So I think what we
Right.
need to do next is set the response.
I was going to say configurable response. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
how do we want to, what do we want from the test side of things? What do we want that to look like?
I think so. I think we can take out the some more of the logging.
Mm-hmm.
We can take out all the logging, in fact.
Yeah.
Because it's all working now.
Yep. Do you want to amend the commit?
Yeah. Did I do that right?
Yeah, I don't know. You tell
Sort
me.
of on autopilot there.
I use IntelliJ to do everything Git these days.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did it right.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we've got our fetch and our deep equal. So I think what we want to do is up here at the top, we want to say server.setResponse. Oh, you know what else? Hold on, I want to do something else before we do anything else. I want to say before each, server.reset. And on here, this dot reset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So now we want to configure the response in our test.
Yes. We'll say server.setResponse. Response, yeah. And we'll just pass in an object with the things we care about, which are the status, the headers, and the body, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the status is going to be, make it a different status.
Let's do 201.
201. And the headers are going to be my response header. And the body is going to be a JSON.stringify. Response body. With that?
Mm-hmm.
Fail because we're missing a semicolon. Of course.
Line 31, yeah.
Set response is not a function.
That's fine.
That's good. Then we're going to have, what do we say? Status, headers, and body.
Right.
And let's default these to some interesting values. 501 is not implemented, isn't it?
I believe so.
And then Actually, let's do it this way.
What happened to status?
I'm not sure. Oh, that would just be me. And
oh, because you changed it to an object. Got it.
This dot next response equals response.
And now we need a next response. Are we going to type some of these?
I figure we'll do all the typing when we're done.
Okay. That's fair.
The nice thing about using SWC is it compiles, in addition to being really fast because it's not doing any real work.
Right.
It's I do find that the types kind of get in my way when I'm prototyping.
Mm-hmm.
So having that not be part of the loop is really nice.
Yep.
Okay, so down here, we'll set this to this dot next response dot status. And then the headers, we have to loop through all the headers.
And do a response set header for each.
Yeah, and I think that's going to give us a key value pair. And then we should be able to. We want to do JSON.stringify here? No, I think we just.
No, we just want the actual.
Yeah.
Presuming that the configured response already has it in JSON. So next response dot body.
Okay. I'm not sure if I did that right. That was kind of a big change.
Didn't like the
yeah,
for
I did
each.
do that wrong. So actually, it's object.entries for each.
So Sweegie noticed that we deleted something important, the connection close.
We sure did.
Because that should be a header that we always add.
Right. But I don't like the implicitness of it. So I'm going to put that here. So that it's really clear when we do our assertion that that's why we're getting a connection close header. It's not happening automatically from the server.
Okay.
But I think what I want to do is recover the comment.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, this is where some kind of abstraction, because it makes it explicit, but it's also kind of irrelevant.
It is. I think the right thing to do here is to actually program the server to loop to keep track of all the connections and kill them forcefully.
Yeah.
Which we might want to add. Okay, so now our assertions have changed. We're no longer getting 418, we're getting 201.
Right.
And we're no longer getting content type, we're getting my response header of header value. And my response body of, we asked for the response.json.
I think it's confusing for the JSON to have body in it.
It is. Yeah, which is good. We actually changed it.
Yeah,
so you're right. I was confused, like, what's going on there? But no.
So can we just Just want to scroll up here. Oops. So my request headers. I've lost where this is coming from.
It is coming from.
Here. Oh, all the way up there. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think
clearly case doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. Headers are case sensitive. So I think what we can say here, giant fly flying around my office now. I think we should check this in.
Yes.
So what do? We
added configurable response.
Fears response. Good.
Yep.
We're almost out of time, but
yes.
I think we're actually in the last few minutes available. I want to do something really cool, which is we built all this in the test.
Mm-hmm.
I want to factor it into production.
Okay.
So, so to factor this into production, what we need to do is I think these are the only two pieces that really matter for production, right?
Right.
I guess there's one more piece, which is what do we want to have come back from this? Right now, the headers and the response body and stuff are kind of awkward. I think what I'd like it to do is to say, this is the fetch response. And we'll say that the response is equal to the status, fetch response dot status, headers of fetch response dot headers, but we'll convert that into an object. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to simplify the interface.
Simplify the comparison stuff, yeah.
Yeah. But also just the interface for our use as well. And the body, let's call that the JSON body.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we think alike on these things. Is going to be that.
Right. Yep.
And that should still work.
Because we're not using response.
You say?
Yeah, we're not using response, but body is unusable because we've now basically streamed it twice.
Ah, yeah. Okay. So I guess I'll just move to the next stage, which is.
Do you want to put the delete in our do the delete from our response before we?
Let's do it for now, but there is the question of. Do we really want our abstraction to delete out that kind of information?
Mm-hmm. Probably not.
Content length, I think we kind of do, because the content length and date are not useful to our clients. I don't know. We'll have to think about that one.
They're certainly not in any way that I can think of right now. Yeah.
But that's the kind of magic abstraction leaky thing. Like, I'll be like, what happened to our content length? And
why can't I get it?
When in the future.
Yeah.
That could get really ugly. So we no longer need this. So I'm just going to take all of this. I'm going to move it up. And we should be able to say assert a deep equal response, comma, status of 201, headers of
whatever we had down there.
That. And body of
whatever we got down there. Too many braces. Right.
Okay.
Can we rename JSON body as JSON somehow? That
Sure.
JSON body feels weird.
There you go.
Yeah, that's better. Cool.
So I think the piece of this that I don't think we're ready to finish to factor this out. So we'll have to do that next episode.
Okay.
Because I think we also have this question of what kind of options are we going to pass in.
Right. Yeah. What's the abstraction we want to build?
Yeah. And it's just it's a neat moment when you move from having it all in your test to having it all in production. But I think that will just have to wait until next time. I did that in my course, and there was a lot of, ooh, that's the best part of the entire course when I did that. Speaking of which, by the time this recording goes up, I think the course will be closed, or it's like closing on Saturday. But my next and possibly final Nullables training course is coming up in June, and it is closed. The registration, it's coming up June 6th, and the registration's closed this week. So if you're interested in that, it's jamesshore.com/s/nullables-training. And I think we have a Nightbot thing for that. And it got really good reviews the first time. And again, I don't know when I'm going to do it again. Definitely not before October, or maybe not even then. So if you're interested, check it out.
Yeah. There's that, but I don't have the other one. Or maybe I do.
Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and check this in.
Yeah.
What did we do? Start to figure out the fetch wrapper API is what we were doing there. You agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, final thoughts?
I knew more than I thought.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know how that felt for you, but it felt like I was actually navigating quite a bit, which was interesting.
I felt the same. Like, I didn't feel like I was leaving you behind.
Yeah.
I was definitely moving through it pretty quickly. Like I said, I've done this sort of wrapper a million times before, and it's a feature part of my course. So I'm very familiar with it. But even so, I felt like you were contributing, you were participating, so it was great. Thoughts about the fetch work in general?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed quite straightforward, and you know, a lot of it sort of is again in this case sort of figuring out the underlying thing that you're wrapping. How does fetch work? Finding out that apparently keep alive is not working the way we thought.
Yes,
exactly. And having that confirmed was kind of neat. And yeah, so it's actually also a really nice way to learn that API, because you're testing little bit by little bit. You've got expectations, and then you're sort of wrapping that. So that was fun.
Yeah, I really have. I've been saying, oh, I wish we have the integration tests for the Java side of things.
Yeah.
And that's because I just find them so valuable, both for documentation and for understanding what's really happening. The trick is that you really have to solve two problems at once. Like if I hadn't done the SpyServer before, this would have been really painful.
Yeah.
Because we have to build the server side and we have to build the client side at the same time. And that does add to the mental burden.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely the test felt really long as we were building it, but still manageable. But yeah, that was and then having to figure out what was going on with connections and things like that.
Yeah, and this will get shrunk down. I typically actually test it in two parts. I test that we are sending the request that we thought we were going to send, and then I test that we're getting the response back that I thought we were going to get, and that brings the test down to be a much more manageable size. but getting there takes a little while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of blows things out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's it.
All right. So next time we'll finish it off and pull it into a production class.
Mm-hmm. And then, depending on how much sidetracking we do, we front loaded all of our sidetracking.
Yes, we did.
A whole bunch in the beginning, and then
Yep.
it was just code.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think if we finish this next time, which seems plausible, we do have to still make it nullable,
Right.
I think. But then we can start working on the backend client,
Right.
Which will require us to start thinking about the backend post endpoint.
Yes.
And we might want to build these two things together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, but yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. See y'all next time.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.